Well, good evening, and welcome to this final installation of our series throughout these Wednesday watch parties for the month of June, where we are looking at the reason for the rainbow. We've covered quite a bit of ground, and we're going to cover quite a bit this evening as well. We started off in looking at what was the reason for the flood. We've looked at some of the scientific evidence to support not only that the flood is possible, but that the reality of what is written in the Bible is accurate and true. Then we've also looked at God's provision for Noah, God's provision for us. And today we're gonna culminate our series and finish up with really what happens when Noah gets off the ark and where the rainbow becomes a covenant between God and man. And what actually does this all of this mean to us? What's the point of all of this? What do we learn from this? What do we take away from this? And so I'm going to read a couple of sections for us. First one in Genesis chapter 8, verse 20, and we'll finish that off. And then I'm going to read another section a little bit later. We're going to address some of that as well. But in Genesis chapter 8, verse 20, we read, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered a burnt offering on the altar." I want to stop there. This is after the waters have receded. Noah and the families have been commanded by God. Everything gets off the ark. And what do we see Noah do? First thing, build an altar to God and make a sacrifice to him. What Noah does in this moment, it really kind of speaks to what we saw at the very beginning when God looked at Noah and he was the only righteous person on earth. And he was the one that God utilized and redeemed and brought through on the ark. That this new earth, if you will, maybe that's one way to look at it. That Noah, the first thing he does is praise God and worship God in the midst of that and thank God for his provision and his continued sustainment in the midst of that. And I think that really speaks ultimately to us. How do we manage? How do we manifest this? Do we worship and praise God even in the midst of difficult times? Because I would imagine, let's just consider this for a moment. This has got to be a difficult time. There's a whole new reality that Noah and his family have to adjust to. And so this whole new reality, what Noah starts off doing in the midst of that is praising God by worshiping him. The text goes on, and when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." There's a powerful message in that we may not pick up on. The status of humanity has not changed. The sinfulness of humanity, God identifies the sinfulness of humanity even through the midst of this, through all of that. God has redeemed Noah, and it's Noah's family. The sinfulness of man still exists. The sinfulness, the reality of that, God points it out that all from our youth, God says our intentions are evil. And I think that's a reality that we need to really acknowledge and accept. I think, to a certain extent, a lot of times we forget that. But that's the reality of who we are. We are sinful. Paul says in Romans, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And that means every one of us. There's nobody that escapes this. And so what we hear here right after the flood, and Noah makes an altar and makes an offering to God, and God's statement is, man's still the same. I mean, that's the Cliff Notes version of it. But as we press on and we look into chapter 9, picking up in verse 7, we read, "And you, be fruitful," this is a command to Noah, "be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it." Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "Behold, I will establish my covenant with you and with your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth that is with you, as many as came out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth. I will establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant." And I'll come back into that in a moment. But what's interesting, I want you to get us to catch this. So Noah gets off the ark, makes an altar to God, makes a sacrifice. God comes in, states humanity's the same. we still have sin issues. There's still a problem with sin. But then God says, never again will I wipe out all flesh with a flood. The implication there is God's going to do something else to deal with sin. And I want us to hear that, because we're still sinners, and God says here, wiping out the earth, and this is more of a message for us than I think it is for God. God knew this from the get-go. For us to look at this, how many of us have had people who have sinned in our lives and think, man, if we just wipe out people with sin, things would be great. Well, we have evidence here that that's not the case. God wiped out all of humanity, kept Noah and his family as Noah the righteous man, and says at the end of it, sin is still there. I'm going to do something different next time. And so for us, we look at that and think, what is the next time? This is God's promise that I will redeem man a different way. And so when we press forward, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all of the generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring the clouds of the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. So the rainbow is a sign of the covenant of God that I will not destroy everything again. I will deal with the sinfulness of man a different way. And that brings us to the point of, what does the rainbow reflect to us? It reflects to us that God has dealt with our sin in a different way through Jesus Christ. We have a different ark. God has provided for us an avenue to have our sin dealt with through the spilled blood and the broken body of Jesus Christ, who came to pay a price for us that we couldn't pay ourselves, because the intent of man is sinfulness. Our intentions and our minds go upon evil all of the time. And God looks at that, and for us, we can reflect and see and realize that wiping out humanity didn't fix sin. God had to fix sin by becoming a man and paying the debt for sin in order that we can be reborn through Jesus Christ and have a new life. So as you see rainbows, don't think of the things that the popular culture wants to say of these things. Remember the covenant of God. Remember that God said, I will redeem you another way. Remember that God points out and says, man is sinful, but I will redeem him. And I will redeem him unto myself, that we can be unified, that we can be in relationship together. Because I created man in my image. We were designed, and you were designed, to be in relationship with God. Your sin keeps you from that. But God loved you enough that he sent his son, that he would pay the price in order that you can be reborn and be brought back into right relationship with God. You can be redeemed through Jesus Christ. Hopefully this series that both Cyril and I have joined in on for these Wednesday watch parties has been beneficial to you. I do look forward. I'm hopeful that we're able to do something similar to this again in the fall with all the elders. Maybe we can get all the guys on board and do a couple more series on these Wednesday watch parties. But I do hope the takeaway of this is every time you see a rainbow now, you remember the promise of God, the sinfulness of humanity, the promise and provision of God in order to redeem humanity in spite of our own sinfulness, that God would pay a price for us, that Christ paid a price for you. God bless you, and hope you have a wonderful evening.